Greetings and welcome back to our Chats with Emily. We are engaged now with poem number 21. We lose because we win. Poem 21 of the 1,775 poems of the Johnson edition of the poems of Emily Dickinson. This will be our first three-line offering, and I love to remind students who read these very short lines. Emily was often challenged about the brevity, the laconic nature of her poetry. And I love poem number 1063, ashes denote that fire was. I love that line as a representative of these short little lines. In other words, for Emily, it doesn't matter if it's a three-line offering, and in an earlier publishing it was four. But I love it as a three-line offering. I think it works really well as a three-line offering. We're going to see there's a tremendous amount of philosophic insight, though, in this brief little poem. And I think Emily is doing something powerful in terms of 3A here, and I'll hope to kind of play that one with us. We're going to meet Emily's paradoxes. I mean, just hear that line, we lose because we win. And already some of you are thinking, before you even read the poem, about, that's really interesting. Sometimes that is true. I think I've won, but actually I've lost. And we can think about our Shakespeare, and you'll remember that the opening lines of Macbeth is fair is foul, and foul is fair. Good is bad, and bad is good. And throughout that play, we've commented, of course, at learnstrong.net, the ways in which sometimes it appears that from Macbeth things are going well, but in fact they're going the opposite direction. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily is our playlist, especially that introductory lecture, and I'm hopeful that you've been with us. We just finished at poem number 20 with Distressful. So let's now turn to poem 21, and let's enjoy what games, and I think, guys, I've said this to you already, I think that, and this is why we've called this series Chats with Emily, because obviously we already did Talks with Walt, all of the readings of the poems of Leaves of Grass, the deathbed edition of Leaves of Grass. But I love to think of the word chat works really well for us with this. If we could have chats with Emily, I think she would remind us again and again the games that she's playing, the fun that she's having. And that's why I love the word chats. Let's just enjoy this poem. We lose because we win. Gamblers, recollecting which, toss their dice again. I love win again. I love the exclamation point at the end. I love that we begin with the word we. We lose because we win. I want you to pay attention to her use of the word lose in her poetry. In poem 377, she says, she writes about to lose one's faith. The notion that in the very act of winning, we actually are losing is obviously going to be part of the paradoxes that we will comment on at 3A. You'll remember in poem 67, success is counted sweetest by those who ne'er succeed. Only losers can actually understand winning. You'll remember in poem 435, much madness is divinest sense to the discerning eye. The idea that there's this complicated perspective on the world that Emily's always wanting to play with. And a lot of it is paradoxical in nature, and so she'll say it. We lose because we win. Now, let's point out, even though this is a very brief little poem, we can study the way Emily likes to write poetry by pointing out that often she will provide a thesis in her very first line, which will, of course, because she never named her poems, become the titles of these poems. We lose because we win is, of course, poem 21. But then she'll, after her little thesis first line, she'll look to validate what she's got to say, because it's going to be a pretty controversial idea. We often win, but actually we lose. And there's going to be a whole lot of people that will read this poem later, and they'll look at, for example, victories. You can think of the American Civil War as a classic example. And yet, was it a victory, or rather was it a loss, because of all the terrible things that happened? So, for example, a whole lot of people who were supposed to have been emancipated, and a war was fought to make sure that happens. The great Martin Luther King Jr. will point out in front of the Lincoln Memorial on his famous I Have a Dream speech day in 1963. Yeah, I just don't see it so well as being, as the check having been actually written and something other than bouncing, right? You'll remember that famous word picture. We lose because we win. Then, interestingly, the only time in all of her poems she references gamblers or gambling is right here. gamblers recollecting which, I love the word recollecting, to me this is the key word. In other words, after a gambler wins, the gambler has a tendency to begin to recollect, to think, right? Well, okay, I lost, or I won. Well, which is it? Well, I won, and that's a good thing, right? Because I won, I can grow quickly overconfident, and what? Toss the dice again. By the way, do notice that it's we lose, but it's their dice. Do you see this? We lose because we win. Gamblers recollecting which toss our dice again. That's what it should be, given that we begin with the word we. So Emily, notice, is now going to fixate on a certain strata of people who lose even though they win. And you could read this poem moralistically, no question. That is to say, be weary, gambling is dangerous, it's the one addiction from which it's so difficult to extricate oneself. Heroin addicts, we can work to get the heroin, of course, somehow outside of the body. Gambling addiction is a different kind of addiction, and you can certainly read this poem moralistically, and a whole lot of people have. But I'm more fascinated by the very fact that she uses the language, toss their dice. Why? Because while today readers maybe of this poem will not immediately go there, Emily's readers would have immediately, and this is, I'm fairly certain this is where Emily in her head is, will go to Matthew 27, and of course the famous 35 to 37 line, where you'll remember after they had nailed Jesus to the cross, the soldiers gambled for his clothes by throwing dice. So we go back to a word picture that Emily's readers would all know. These Roman soldiers nail Christ to the cross, and then they gamble for his clothes by tossing dice. That is to say, did we win or did we lose in that exchange, in that moment? And I think Emily is playing a very interesting theological game by referencing, alluding to the Matthew 27, 35 through 37 passage, which I find remarkable. Well, what exactly do you think is going on here at 2a? Well, I think that she's saying that there's a challenge every time we win. You'll remember that at the conclusion of Whitman's Song of the Open Road, now understand me well, it's provided in the very essence of things, a greater struggle is necessary. I think Emily is playing a very similar game. That is to say, often winning can lead to an overconfidence that actually culminates with losing. In other words, winning and losing are, in almost like Taoist yin-yang kinds of understandings, two sides, right? And who knows, as the Taoist story goes, what is good and what is bad. It's all kind of situational in that regards. At 2b, I love her word choice. Gamblers only gets used one time, gamble or gamblers, in all of her poetry, and it's here. I love the selection of we to begin the poem, and then as we pointed out at the end of the poem, again, it isn't they, is it? Notice it's toss their dice again. Emily's paradoxes at 3a, well, again, we mentioned it in poem 67, success is counted sweetest by those who ne'er succeed. To comprehend a nectar requires sorest need. Not one of all the purple host who took the flag today, right? That idea that nobody who won the purple flag can tell so well as he, right, defeated dying on who's forbidden near the strains, burst agonized and clear. I love poem 435 for this paradox as well. Much madness is divinest sense. I'm kind of setting you guys up for these poems that are coming. I want you to see in the way in which Emily plays their games of paradox that she's always kind of asking us to see things from multiple perspectives. Is it winning or is it losing? And I think Emily herself struggled with the idea of her own value and her own success. Am I a winner or am I a loser of, for example, a poet? We obviously see her as just pure genius. At 3b, well, we could ask what are your views on gambling, and there's a lot of different ways to think about gambling or taking risks, but more importantly, if you want to own a poem like this, you can think about it this way. What was a time that you won, but now that you look back at it, you go, maybe I lost. You know what I mean? Or was a time when you lost and maybe you won? I mean, we can see it both ways, right? Thank you.